Raj Peterson is a pediatric head and neck surgeon. Annalisa Jones is an obstetrician and gynecologist. Kim Phillips is a dermatologist. Raj doesn't feel guilty that she doesn't deliver babies. Annalisa does not think she should remove skin cancer. And Kim doesn't feel bad that she doesn't reconstruct cleft lips and palates. Jasmine sings with her daughter. Joyce Hansett coaches her son's basketball teams. Jen Martin organizes pantries like nobody's business. Haley Kirkland wins Halloween. You don't have to do any of those things. You don't have to keep your house spotless, remember to sign all the forms, take beautiful pictures, or make gourmet meals to be a good mom. You get to choose your own specialties and let other moms cover the rest. No guilt, no shoulds. This is the How She Moms podcast with Whitney Archibald. I'm a mother of 5 on a mission to help moms connect with your kids, manage your homes, and create your own unique version of motherhood. I curate ideas from different moms so you can pick and choose what works for you and your family. In the last episode, How She Feels Mom Guilt, we talked about what mom guilt is and why we feel it. We also talked about the difference between mom guilt and mom shame and some of the many factors that play into these complicated feelings. Today's episode was hard to name. I started out with how she conquers mom guilt, but we learned last episode that we don't want to entirely eradicate guilt. It's a sign that we care about how we show up as a mom, and it can help us improve. We can conquer shame all day long, but I don't want this episode only to be about shame either. So I thought how she neutralizes mom guilt might be better. But that didn't feel quite right because I'm not sure that's the goal either, and frankly, I don't want to be the one to decide what your guilt goals should be. So I landed on this title, How She Deals with Mom Guilt, because all 10 of the moms in this episode deal with guilt in different ways, and I hope this is exactly what you come to my podcast for, different approaches that can broaden your perspective and that you can add to your own toolbox so they're there when you need them. So we'll talk about 10 different tools for dealing with mom shame and guilt. Before we do, I want to update you about the family work charts I introduced at the beginning of this year. These are not chore charts that track the work your kids do each week. They're more of a big picture overview of all the visible and invisible work of running a home and family and taking care of the people in it. More importantly, they help you identify or determine who is in charge of doing all this work and help you share it among family members. Now that several listeners have bought the charts and implemented them in their families, I've started to get feedback and it's been so exciting. I just got an email last week that said, "These charts and the podcast have been transformative for me and my family. I've listened to those episodes at least 3 times each. The way I'm thinking about our family work has shifted for the better." This was so exciting to hear. There are 3 family work charts, 2 about how each family member takes care of ourselves and each other, a self-evaluation and a family progress tracker, and 1 about how we take care of our home and family together. You can check these out and buy them for just $16 at howshemoms.com and then learn how to use them by listening to episodes 81 and 82. Now let's talk about these tools for dealing with mom guilt. The first tip is to put yourself in context, your own context based on your own unique situation. Your financial situation, your stage in life, your profession, the size of your family, how you were raised, and the amount of help and support you have. This tip is brought to you by the brilliant Bryce Reddy, a family therapist who specializes in maternal mental health.
We can all just do our best with what we have and the information we have in the moment. And with our circumstances, a lot of people, choice is a privilege in how we, raise our kids, or whether we go back to work, or, whether we send our kids to certain daycares that one costs more money, one costs less money. We're always making choices, and we don't always have the breadth of choices that we might like.
You can follow Bryce on Instagram at mombrain.therapy, and I highly suggest that you do. Her graphics speak all sorts of mom truths. Alexandra Rosso is a great example of how context is everything and how varied that context can be. She's a single mom, an actress, and flamenco dancer. Of course, her version of motherhood is going to look different than mine, and probably yours. I talked to her last spring when her daughter had not yet started school.
I am definitely one of those that is tormented by the mom guilt. And because it comes from the fact that I work from home and she's at home, she's not in school. So when I'm doing things like right now, that I'm here, in this interview, she's out there on the iPad, just by herself. And that makes me feel really bad. Being an artist and doing the work that I do, I have to spend a lot of time by myself, whether it's like recording or whatever in here, doing auditions. And so she spends a lot of time by herself, either on the iPad or watching TV, but that's my only option. I mean, I really have no other option at the moment. She's not in school. I'm waiting for her to start kindergarten. It's going to be a game changer for me.
Yeah.
But I feel so bad. And sometimes I can't even focus on my work because I'm like, I'm a terrible mother. Like, what is my daughter doing out there? She's 5. She's like in the living room all by herself, watching who knows what. I mean, I keep an eye on what she's watching. She's not watching anything inappropriate, but still, like, I feel like I should be there with her. But then again, the time that I do spend with her, we have so much fun. And then she turns around and like does like, such awesome things that I'm like, okay, I must be doing something right, because she's such a, smart, creative girl. I'm like, okay, we're not so bad. We're not doing so bad. Like whatever she's, the time that she spends on the iPad, which is way more than I'm sure other people do, because what else am I going to do? I'm the only adult here and I have to work, so that's my babysitter. The TV, the iPad, those are my babysitters. And she spends way more time on that than I would like. But it is what it is. This is what works for us at the moment, until she goes to school or whatever. But I do get a lot of awesome feedback from my friends and the people around us. They're like, you're such a good mom. Like, she's such a smart, beautiful girl. Like, you're doing a good job. And that makes me feel better.
Sometimes Alex's daughter stays up later than most other kids at her mom's dance rehearsals. But she also gets to sleep in, and she gets exposed to amazing cultural experiences. She gets to see her mother do what she loves. Sure, she may be on screens more than Alex would like, but listen to how much love this girl has in her life. Alex is a great mom. The next tip is kind of related, but with a wider lens. It's to zoom out, to get some perspective. We're going to talk about 3 ways to zoom out. First, you can zoom out to look at other parents. Chances are you are neither the best nor worst parent you know. Most of the parents you know, like you and the moms in the intro, are good at some things and not others. I'm not suggesting that you get wrapped up in comparison. That can lead you toward mom shame instead of away from it. But you can acknowledge the great parenting you see on Instagram and at the park, while also recognizing that these moms aren't perfect either. Second, you can zoom out to look at other kids. Don't be picky about which kids you're looking at. Cast a wide net and you'll see the same variety in kids as you do with parents. I noticed the importance of this because of my husband. Occasionally, he'd come home from work talking about so-and-so's kid who is already potty trained, or someone whose kid was a great swimmer, or whose kid was doing really well in school, and wondered why our kids weren't doing those things. Or he'd be shocked by a tantrum or specific behavior by our own kids that didn't faze me a bit. I realized quickly that the difference between our perspectives was that he spent very little time with children other than our own. I'd seen the kind of tantrums that the potty prodigy could throw. I had a much better grasp on how truly insane and illogical kids' behavior is in general because I've been to lots of parks, playdates, and preschools. Again, the point here is not to compare your kids to other specific kids, but to get a feel for the variety of kids out there and the wide range of normal. This can also help you recognize when you actually do need to be concerned. Teachers are very helpful touchstones here too, since they know the range of age-appropriate behavior and their perspective can help you evaluate if your child's behavior is something to be concerned about. I love Renee Rena's perspective about comparison and especially standard milestones.
Milo, he was born small, and my 2 friends who had kids right at the exact same time, they were born much bigger, and they hit every milestone like way before we did. I hated tummy time. It made me really anxious. But again, I was like, I don't think tummy time was a thing when I was growing up. No. And I can still lift my head. So I'm not going to stress over this. I'm not going to stress over this. He's going to be fine, and he is. But I think we get so paranoid because there are kind of the outliers in these different situations to where, if you don't hit a milestone by a certain time, then there could be something else going on, which okay, you go get it checked out. But for the most part, there is a huge range in where kids will meet milestones because they're all born at different times in the pregnancy. Milo was 38 weeks. Some are 41 weeks. So technically they're 3 weeks bigger than Milo, but they were born on the same day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So just not comparing to other kids and just not stressing about all these different milestones. And I think when you're confident in your own decisions, you're also much less likely to look at somebody else and judge them for what they're doing, because you understand that they're just like you. They're making the best choice for their family.
Renee is a psychologist, the host of the Mom Room podcast, and a prolific TikToker and Instagrammer with lots of great perspective. The third way to get perspective is to zoom out in your kid's timeline. Ask yourself, how much is this thing I'm stressing about, breastfeeding or preschool or screen time, going to matter in 5, 10, or 20 years? Here's Raj Peterson, the head and neck surgeon I talked about in the intro. I asked her if she feels mom guilt.
I feel less guilty about it as the years have gone by, I think. Early on, it's hard because I think a lot gets put on moms about doing it all, and being able to do it all. Whether that's something that we put on ourselves or it's societal or, wherever. It comes from somewhere, though. And I feel like, even with breastfeeding, that was never easy for me. And I felt super guilty, but did it. And then felt super happy when I stopped, and then guilty about feeling happy about it. And it's just like, I was a formula fed baby and I turned out okay. It's just, so I think early on, there's more of that because you want to be so perfect for your new baby. And it doesn't always work out that way. And so I think as the years go by, I feel less so that way. And now it's like when people ask for advice, I have much more perspective to give back and be like, you just make the choices that work for you.
And let's end this section about perspective with Renee Reina again.
My husband and I, we are awesome parents. Sometimes I'm like, geez, it's a shame that we're not going to have more kids because we're freaking awesome at it. And we're a good team. And I'm totally confident in how Milo is being raised. But at the same time, I think others might not be because they are focusing on those things that literally don't matter. At the end of the day, if you think about your child growing up and being a respectable, member of society and, getting a good job and being happy and fulfilled in life, the things that we are worrying about, oh my God, that doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, I think back to, now I'm going to forget which book it was because I've read so many Malcolm Gladwell's books, but he talks about how nobody knows at what age any adult learned how to read. We do not compare that statistic past kindergarten, first grade, second grade, whatever. Yeah. And yet we put so much emphasis on that or hold it as a badge of honor if our kid's an early reader, but they're like, adults can just read and we don't compare fluency or ages at which they learn to read. So,
or as they get older, I think a lot of the times people compare their children to their peers, which again is not a good idea. Don't do that. Everyone is on their own path in life. And, there's probably someone out there whose kid is terrible in math and they're really struggling. And the parents think it's the end of the world, because their kid doesn't thrive in math. Well, I did not thrive in math at all. And I got to university. I excelled in statistics, which people think is math, but it's not. It's totally different. I crushed all my stats classes, and now I have a PhD in psychology. And I was brutal in math. I hated it. I think I got 50% in one of my high school classes, and I'm doing okay.
Another guilt trap we can get in, especially in the early years of parenting, is black and white thinking. We think there's one right answer or one right way to do things, and if we miss that right thing, it's over. I spent so much time researching, trying to find the right approach to discipline or introducing solids or potty training or sleep training or teaching kids to read. It took me a while to realize how different my approach needed to be for each child and each situation. It took so much guilt and stress out of my life when I stopped looking for one magic bullet. Sometimes this goes back to comparison. Maybe you think the way your own mother or friend did something must be the one right way, or what you read in a book. Here's Renee again.
For me, like with breastfeeding, after a few weeks, we switched over to formula. I kept pumping because, again, I had this thing in my mind like, no, he is going to have my breast milk and, I'm going to pump and freeze all this. And then it ended up being, a total waste of effort and waking up in the middle of the night to pump. And because anytime I started to reintroduce breast milk, he would have like crazy diarrhea. I didn't want to do like the elimination diets and because he was up all night and gassy. So instead of feeling bad, like I didn't breastfeed, I gave him formula. It was like, no, but look at the situation that you were in. Like you were crazy anxious because he was having diarrhea. He was born really small. So again, like having the diarrhea, I was worried about him not gaining weight and not, like taking in the nutrients. So like putting all these things together, the formula was the absolute best decision for us in that moment. So it's like really thinking about why you chose what you did instead of just being like ruminating about why you're not doing the thing that you think you should have done, So like putting the focus on, well, why did we make this decision? And then it makes you more confident in why you chose that.
The fourth tool to combat mom shame is to own your priorities. We actually do this all the time, but in a roundabout way when we say, I don't have time for that. What we're really saying is, that's not my priority right now. This is where the shoulds come in. We look at what we are doing and start thinking about all the other things we should be doing. When you find that you're shoulding yourself, it's a good time to step back and make a list of your values and priorities. Chanel Nielsen, a life coach at ChanelNielsenCoaching.com, learned this lesson from Jessica Jackson, who we will hear from later in this episode.
A lot of times guilt comes up because we have this idea of should. And when we put should in, it's almost like, should I be working right now or should I be with my kids? And there's only two options. And if you do whichever one, like you're wrong. And when we have this idea that only one option is right and the other one is wrong, of course we're going to feel guilt. And so the reframe there is to say, what do I want to be doing right now? Well, for the next half an hour, I want to be working. And when I'm done with that, I want to go downstairs and be with my family. And that kind of takes a lot of the pressure off. Getting rid of the should and switching that to want has really helped me a lot because I can say, oh, well, right now I do want to do this. And that's a valid choice. I want to be with my kids and I want to work. But right now I choose to work. And when I get home, I just choose to give you kids all the love. If you can understand that dual wanting, that I think is some of that feeling because we're sad that we can't be in two places at once.
I love this idea of dual wanting. Like we talked about earlier, our daily choices are rarely black and white. There's subtle judgments about how to spend our time, choices between good, better, and best. And doing it all is not an option, nor is it our responsibility. As Anna Zupanzik, a mother of 4, mentioned in our interview,
I don't have to do everything or be everything to everyone. That's not my role. It's not my job. It's not what I'm called to do.
I asked Monica Packer, host of the About Progress podcast, how she figures out her own priorities.
So when I feel that anxiety, for me, it's really anxiety based, as well as coupled with the should voice, it helps me calm myself down and to be more confident in the choices that I've made or to be confident about the pivot I'm going to make by just coming back to, well, who am I as a person and what matters to me? And as part of that, remembering I cannot be everything to everybody, and that includes my kids. Every child in a big family like mine has 7 kids has a different perspective of the same parenting they had from the same parents. And it's just a matter of going back to who you are, what matters to you, and doing your best with love. That always helps me come back to myself and feel more grounded in myself. And the thing about that is I think it also gives us the opportunity to celebrate other women and their differences. Like instead of feeling guilty that I'm not doing the same party as my neighbor down the street as she is for the same kid, the kid that's the same age as mine. I can instead know, like, this is who I am. That's who she is. That's awesome. Because I think that's where that mom shaming culture comes in, when moms are attacking each other. And I see that not as an attack on each other, although it is, as much as it is a defense mechanism against
insecurities.
It's like, if I put them down, then I'm right. It's more about trying to prove and try to uphold, again, your identity as a good mom because of the choices you've made, instead of just say, no, it's okay that we do these things differently.
This evaluation is always shifting because priorities shift with your circumstances. Here's some wisdom from Maria Eckersley.
I honestly don't use the word balance very often when it comes to motherhood for this very reason. I feel like I never achieve a balance. When you think of balance, you think of like scales that are even and that you're giving enough love to each kid and they're all in a content, happy place. And I feel like for me, that visual doesn't work with my mothering. So one of the things that works for me is instead I try to get a harmony in my mothering. So there are going to be times when my 17-year-old needs a lot more attention. And that means Violet doesn't get a cozy tuck in. She doesn't get reading books. She says, I say goodnight and give her a kiss and I get her in her bed so I can go talk to the 17-year-old. And that's a harmony, right? It means I'm putting the same amount of effort and time in, but it's divvied up very unevenly. And the reason that works is because there's going to be times when Violet needs extra time and Emily will be happy to, just head to bed without me even saying goodnight for that night. So I feel like instead of worrying constantly about balance, you just have to trust that your mothering instincts and the promptings and ideas you get will help you find harmony. And as one note goes up, another one might go down. And that's just kind of for me, the best way I've found to mother without the guilt. Because I feel like there are times when I don't get a chance to read with Violet and I just say, I'm too tired, sweetie. You got to just get in bed and I'll see you in the morning. And so I feel like you have to give yourself permission for that to be okay. And the way I can do that is by noticing where I amplified my motherhood somewhere else. Because it's really easy to have a terrible tuck-in with Violet and then think, gosh, a better mom would have read with her. I would have sang her a song. But instead, I try to look through my day and think, okay, where did I amplify my mothering? I must be tired for some reason. And I can look through the day and say oh yeah, I actually helped Will with this science fair project. And I made dinner tonight instead of getting pizza. That's why I needed to, reduce Violet's tuck-in energy because I used it somewhere else. So I feel like that kind of gives me peace of mind about my parenting.
Maria runs a website called mechmom.com where she posts ideas and products to help you be the fun mom. I featured her in episode 74, How Maria Makes It Fun. The last point I want to make in this section about priorities is that explaining our priorities to our children can also be a great teaching tool. If you don't have time to help them with something as immediately as they want you to, explain to them what you're doing and why it's your priority at the moment. You don't have to do this every time, but it's good for them to see some of the difficult choices you have to make and see the process you go through. I loved this advice from Nancy Maldonado. She went back to work when her son was 3 and felt a lot of guilt about that.
There was guilt there, absolutely. And then there's guilt, for example, like when I'm not home. Like there were days before COVID where I would leave the house before he woke up and I would get home when he was already in bed. And that felt awful. And I think part of the way that I have justified it or been able to work through it is because of the work that I do.
Yeah.
Right. And he knows that. And so I always encourage my staff and my team who works for me, like, bring your child to work if you ever get the opportunity. Let them see what you are doing. And that the reason that you're not with them is because you're doing something else. You're giving back in a way, you know what I mean? And you're not just not with them.
Yeah.
And I've always believed that. And so I think him being able to see what it is that I do makes me feel a little less guilty about that he knows when I'm not with him, it's because I'm doing something that's meaningful. And hopefully in some way helping to make the world just a little bit of a better place.
And Nancy's work has given a lot to the world. She's a community activist, and when I interviewed her last spring, she was the CEO of the Chicano Federation of San Diego. Since, like Anna, we can't do everything, the 5th tool is to lean into our strengths and own what we're good at. The idea for the intro of this episode came from my friend Jen Brewer, a mom of 7, a writer, speaker, nutritionist, and so much more. She's one of those people who always has a new exciting project. She was deep in early motherhood, overwhelmed and depressed when she had this epiphany relating her job as a stay-at-home mom to her husband's job.
So my husband did the medical school thing. He did an internship year in internal medicine and hated it. Hated it, every second of it. And he would come home often and be like, if I had to do this the rest of my life, I would die. I just could not handle this. Because his specialty is dermatology. 12 years into his field, and he's like a kid on Christmas going to work. And so one day I finally was trying to explain to him my misery, for lack of a better terminology. And I said, look, honey, let's say that somebody were to tell you, you get to be a doctor. And being a doctor means you get to do internal medicine. But you're a doctor, so you have to be happy with it because that's your love. But what a doctor means is that you do internal medicine. And he physically cringed. He's like, wait, what? What are you talking about? And I said, that's what it's like to try to fit yourself into this mold of what it means to be a mom. Congratulations, you get to be a mom and you get to love it. And to be a good mom, you do X, Y, Z. And I said, why can't we as moms, why can't we specialize? And I finally owned up to the fact that I am not a toddler mom. I have had toddlers for 15 years and finally realized I do not like that age between like 18 months and the age of 4. I'll do it. It's not that I can box them up and ship them off. I will do it, but it doesn't mean I have to force myself to love it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Now, teenage kids, knock on wood, I still have a lot to go through the teenage years. I adore the teenage years. I adore it. I love it. We can have our meaty conversations. We can, for whatever reason, and we've had some pretty hefty issues go through teenage years. But that's what I'm built for. I just bring me your hard problems. I'll go through the trenches with you. Crying about, I don't know, toddler problems. I struggle. Candyland, I struggle. I struggle sitting through hours of Candyland. But I finally have come to own that with me. My specialty is this, not this. And it's okay. I'll do the other part because I love my child and I want them to grow, but I'm not going to force myself to pretend like I'm fulfilled in that arena. Does that make sense?
That's awesome. Yeah.
Like I am not a nighttime mom. I will not bathe my kids at night. In fact, my husband does the nighttime reading. He does the tuck-ins. If they want to say goodnight to me, they'll come and kiss me when I'm in bed. I go to sleep before almost anybody in my house. I'm Cruella de Vil after about 8 o'clock at night. That's not my specialty. Morning mom, if you want to see me in prime, come in the early morning. I rock early morning hours. I will snuggle. I will read you books in the morning. I will get you ready in the morning. That's me. That's my specialty. I'm a morning specialty mom. I'll do all my baking in the morning. And I've come to own that. I don't have to do the night shift. I will do it, but I don't have to pretend like I love it.
I actually did a whole episode on this topic of writing your own job description as a mom in episode 30, A Mom's Job, if you want to hear more moms talk about how they find their specialties. There's also a whole series on how moms discover their passions in episodes 61 through 64. The next tool is just to be kind to yourself. Bryce Reddy has gotten really good at this.
On myself. And obviously, I think that comes with a lot of practice. I mean, it's very easy to be like, oh, I don't do any of those things. But like, I've also talked through this, process with hundreds of people. So I have a lot of practice in kind of redirecting those thoughts that can kind of consume us. But I'm also human. So like anybody else, there are times when, I think my mom guilt can flare up. And those are times like when I'm tired or I'm not feeling well, or, I'm really kind of, I have a newborn right now, or I don't know if he's still considered a newborn. He's 3 months old. But, I think when you're kind of in the thick of something new, like that mom guilt can kind of creep up too, So I think that I don't feel it on like a regular basis necessarily, but I do have a lot of practice in, and redirecting myself and being gentle with myself and knowing kind of the bigger picture as a therapist and how life is a marathon, not a sprint. And it's really easy to kind of start judging ourselves on these little micro moments that we have, like, oh, I shouldn't have yelled, or I shouldn't have done that. And, I can always remind myself, like, I can do better tomorrow. I can do better in the next 10 minutes. I can make a different choice. And practicing those skills of kind of talking to yourself in that kind, compassionate way is a great way to kind of cope with those harsh, critical feelings of mom guilt, right? That can kind of come up.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are some of those specific tools, like even specific words that we can give people to say to themselves when they get in that cycle of guilt?
Well, I think the biggest thing is just noticing it, right? That's the first thing I always want to practice with people, is that so often we just like are on autopilot and we don't even hear those critical like things that we're saying to ourselves. We just kind of like flow through them and we start like feeling agitated and irritated and like bad about ourselves. And we're kind of like bubbling up like a little, pot of water. But being able to kind of tune in and recognize when you're talking like that to yourself, when you are being critical of yourself, is a great skill to have. And I think it's kind of like the foundation of making any sort of change, is you have to actually recognize that it's happening to begin with. So noticing those kind of physical cues, those mental cues that are telling you like, I'm being hard on myself right now, like too hard on myself, and listening to what that harsh critical voice is saying, like, you could have done better, you're the worst, like, those little things, and tuning into those phrases or those thoughts that are kind of going through our mind, and being intentional about responding to them, saying like, I don't have time for that. Like, I can do better in the next 10 minutes. How would I talk to a friend who was saying that about herself or himself? Would I be like, yeah, you are the worst? No, you would never say that. You would take it back. You'd be like, you know what? You're doing your best. You've had a hard week. You haven't been sleeping a lot. Like, what can we do to kind of, help you feel a little bit more together? What, do you need some time on X day to, take so-and-so out for a solo day with mom? Being able to, respond to those thoughts and kind of problem solve around them. Like, what do you need to feel better about that situation? Or what do you need to feel a little, more connected to someone else, or connected to your child and yourself?
Tool 7 is to take a minute to examine the guilt you feel. In the last episode, we talked about how mom guilt is often irrational. If you hold it up to the light of logic, or even just think about it after you've gotten a little sleep, it might just disappear. When I asked Jessica Jackson, host of the Thriving in Motherhood podcast, if she feels mom guilt, this was her response.
I was one of those people before I became a mom who was like super adamant about not having mom guilt. Like, I was a thing I was determined to not experience because I thought it was dumb. And then I became a mom and I was already dying in every way, and so I did struggle with mom guilt. It was basically eradicated for me, though, once I learned about cognitive distortions, and that all of this mom guilt is created by shoulds, these should statements, which aren't real. And I was like, what? Everything in my head is a should. I should be doing dishes. I should be playing with my kids. I should be reading a book. I should be getting dressed. I should be exercising. I should be cooking a meal. And once I realized that like 90% of my internal dialogue was a distortion and wasn't even reality, and I could change those, like, mom guilt just kind of went away. And then do I have guilt because I have a conscience? Yeah. Like, if I do something wrong, but then I like go repair it and handle the guilt in a healthy way. But like, that mom guilt, I'm convinced, is just like made up distortions of unhelpful thinking.
The next tip is to surround yourself with support. To some moms, this sounds easy and obvious. To others, it seems impossible. I've got episodes in the works to go in depth into how to make friends, end mommy wars, and support each other. In fact, if you have insights or experience related to this topic, I'd love to talk to you. Email me at whitney@howshemoms.com or DM me on Instagram or Facebook. We heard from Alexandra Rosso earlier in this episode. Part of her support group is Wendy Castellano-Wolf, also a flamenco dancer and the other host of the Mamacita podcast. Wendy is one of the moms who doesn't feel a lot of mom guilt, partly because she also has a really strong support system, even built into her own home. She lives in a multi-generational household with her parents.
Having my parents around let me work. I had built-in babysitting, for goodness sake. I mean, that's priceless. When Soren was born, I literally could accept any job, go to work, guilt-free, not have to pay a babysitter, come home, and not feel crappy about it because my son had spent time with his grandparents.
This is huge. There does seem to be a direct correlation between the kind of support moms have and the amount of guilt they feel. I think part of this is because they realize it's okay not to be able to do everything themselves, and they really don't have to. They have friends and family who can step in and fill the gaps. This is a big reason my grandma didn't know what the heck I was talking about when I mentioned mom guilt. She had a tight village of moms who would get together and help each other do chores and let the kids play. They'd watch out for each other's kids and help each other out. If you, like most of us, don't live with your parents, or in the 1940s, you may have to work harder to build a support system and take that vulnerable step of asking for help. But there are so many other moms searching for support that when we can find each other and band together, it's a beautiful thing. This idea of surrounding ourselves with support extends to social media. Social media gets blamed for a lot of mom guilt, but it can also be part of the solution. You get to curate your own experience here. You can stop following accounts that make you feel guilt and start following accounts that help you feel support. People who show the realities of motherhood, both good and bad. Okay, on to Tool 9. In the last episode, we talked about how parents are ultimately not responsible for their kids' behavior or choices. This may be the hardest part of mom guilt to overcome. If only I had taught him this. If only I had done a better job at that. Recognizing that our children are their own people with their own agency is hard, but necessary as they grow up to live their own lives. You have influence in their lives, but you can't control their lives. Janet Thompson, one of my motherhood mentors, shared her story about learning this lesson.
Well, you always feel guilty that you're not doing a good job, but then you have these spirits that are all individual and have their own free agency, and you have to accept that. I have a couple of situations where I wish that they had done this or they done that, and their lives are not exactly the way I wanted them to turn out or expected them to turn out. I was really concerned about two of my children that are still living with me, and their siblings have said, "Mom, why don't you do something about that? They should be out on their own," and blah blah blah. And they're very critical of me, so I was like racking my brain, praying and fasting and trying to figure out how to do it. And the thought came into my head as clear as day. If they weren't your kids and living in your house, what would they be doing? And would they be saying family prayer? Would they be saying prayer over the meals? Would they be visiting their nephews and nieces and spending time with them? Would they be going to church every Sunday? What things would they be doing or wouldn't they be doing if they didn't live with you? And so I totally, from that point on, just stopped my guilt, stopped my trying to control, stopped my trying to inspire. I just accepted them. And once I did that, I just let go of that, and I just felt so free. It was like, I'm free. I'm not burdened with that anymore. That's not part of my personality anymore. And so became very happy about that and less guilty, no guilt at all.
Yeah. And this is where I want to leave the episode, with a related tip focusing on love. Loving and accepting our kids for who they are and loving ourselves for who we are. Here's Maria Eckersley again to take us out.
I remember when Jack was first diagnosed with autism, we had so many kids that I was scared to even join the autism mom groups because they were so devoted to their autistic child. And it always made me feel like I wasn't keeping up, like I haven't read that book. Nope, I don't know about that theory. Oh, nope, I didn't know that was a thing. And it was a constant weight on me. And I realized for me at least, as I mothered Jack, my whole primary goal is that Jack knows every single day and as much as possible throughout the day that I love him and I think he's going to be successful in life. And that is my focus and that is my emphasis. And yes, there's 100 different ways to teach that, but as long as he gets a little piece of that from me every day, I feel like I'm doing what I was sent here to do. And I feel like that with my other kids to some degree too. It's not so much about molding them in exactly the right way. It's about keeping them malleable so that as adults, they can be formed into the person they're supposed to be. I'm just supposed to keep them learning. I'm supposed to keep them feeling loved and supported. And I'm not trying to make perfect adults. They won't become that until the very end of their life. I'm trying to just give them options and make them feel appreciated and loved and happy. And if we can accomplish that, then I feel like you can feel like you're a good mom.
Thank you so much for listening to the How She Moms podcast and for being part of this community. There are so many other ways for you to connect and hopefully also contribute. I share tips and ideas regularly on Instagram and Facebook at How She Moms. You can find past episodes and other resources at howshemoms.com. And you can always just email me directly at whitney@howshemoms.com. Special thanks to my own wonderful mom, Susan Singley, for recording my theme music. She played this song all the time when I was growing up, and to me, it's the soundtrack of motherhood.